please welcome James Simpson.
Thank you, Jamie. Well, I've been sniffling all afternoon, and somebody said that there's a really bad pollen out there in North Carolina that, everybody's getting hit by. So before I came, I just basically drowned my nose in Afrin so that I wouldn't sniffle while I'm talking. But if I do sniffle, I just want you to know, it's your fault. All right, so that's the name of my book, as Jamie said, Red Green Axis, Refugees, Immigration, and the Agenda to Erase America. And honestly, at its bottom, that's what it's about. I always like to start from the beginning. And I have to say that refugee resettlement is, and for that matter, illegal immigration, is not a liberal issue, it's not a conservative issue, it's not a Democrat issue, it's not a Republican issue. There are people who are liberals and conservatives who like refugee resettlement. They even like illegal immigration. Some of my fellow conservatives, that's beyond me. And then there's Democrats, Republicans, liberals, and conservatives on the other side. So, this is not really a partisan issue. But after you see this presentation, I think you should come to the conclusion, if you're honest with yourself, which side of the issue is the right side. It did start as a left-wing agenda, though, as most of our public policy agendas are, or began as. The issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution. A leftist, 60s leftist said that. David Horowitz repeated it. And it was probably the most honest thing the left has ever said. Because what they're really talking about, it doesn't matter what the issue is. The issue is only relevant insofar as it advances their agenda. And their agenda is to insinuate themselves into positions of power, to ultimately grab all of it, and in the process make themselves at least a good living, if not, in many cases, very wealthy. But it's a wealth that they earn on our backs. It's not a wealth that they earn through anything they contribute or anything that they produce. I call them entrepreneurial parasites. It's a crisis strategy. You have to get this. People have lots of reasons for supporting immigration and refugee resettlement, but the fact of the matter is, it's a crisis strategy. It dilutes our culture by bringing in people from all over the world. People with no understanding of our laws, our traditions, our Constitution, no interest in finding out about them. They definitely want a better life in many cases. And they like all the goodies that our government provides. But that's completely different from becoming American in the traditional sense. The way it's constructed, it creates racial division, tensions, it creates unemployment for Americans. It changes America by changing its people. And the left's ultimate goal, same thing with illegal immigration, same thing in fact with much of legal immigration, is to ultimately build a voting bloc that will deliver to them what they call a permanent progressive majority. Now, I'm not saying that. I'm quoting a very prominent leftist, who said, Alicio Medina, who said that. resettlement agenda was established by the UN at the 1976 Conference on Human Settlements. But oddly, they really didn't talk that much about settlements. They talked about redistribution. They talked about redistribution, not merely of wealth. We think of Marxist redistribution as redistribution of income. But they talked about redistribution of wealth, public ownership of property, and redistribution of populations. Because, see, it's unfair that Somalians have to live in that barren desert while we get to live in this verdant country. It's not fair. So they need to be redistributed over here. And here's some of the quotes directly from that document. And the bottom one is the best. Public control of land use is indispensable to its protection as an asset for the achievement of long-term objectives of human settlement policies and strategy. What are those? Human settlement policies can be powerful tools for the more equitable distribution of income and opportunities. Okay? And it would be nice if there were going to be redistributionists and really go for equality. It would be nice if they were equal about it. But, in fact, all of these populations are redistributed to the West. Why is that? They're not being redistributed to China. They're not being redistributed to Russia, for God's sakes. They're not being redistributed to any of the Arab countries. Arab countries are taking 0 Syrian refugees, by the way. They're afraid. They're worried about their security. We are taking all of them. Why is that? Why is this supposed equitable distribution, redistribution of populations around the world targeting the West singularly? Well, it's because that's not the goal. The goal, as I said, is to subvert our country. It's to subvert the West, because the West, with its traditions and cultures, stands in the way of their agenda. They say it. So, the Refugee Act of 1980, written by Teddy Kennedy, just like the 1965 Immigration and Nationalities Act, fundamentally changed the program. And the UN High Commissioner for Refugees refers most of the refugees. He has an ongoing contract with the State Department. The State Department provides more money to the UN High Commissioner for Refugees than any other country. And the UNHCR is heavily influenced by the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, which is a 56-nation, plus the Palestinian Territories Organization of Muslims. It's the second largest organization in the world, next to the UN. And they have a very large influence, but we don't really see it or hear about it. So overseas refugee processing centers take applications, they process those applications, and they get sent to the State Department. The State Department picks out who they want, and they turn it over to resettlement contractors, misnamed voluntary agencies, short to the acronym VOLAGs. Got to have a VOLAG. Got to have an acronym, you know. It's come from D.C. And they decide where in your communities to place refugees. They're supposed to consult with local leaders. They don't. They're supposed to consult with stakeholders. Let me ask you something. Who in this room thinks of themselves as a stakeholder in their community? Hands? Who doesn't? I want to hear that. I want to see the hands who doesn't think they're a stakeholder in their community. Okay, now we get the answer. Nobody. Everybody thinks they're a stakeholder. That's right. But guess what? Go talk to a voluntary agency. Go talk to a VOLAG leader. Ask him a question. Ask her a question. You'll get silence for an answer. We're being told that we are selfish and inconsiderate in wanting to resist refugee resettlement. The United States resettles more refugees than all other countries combined. That's where it stands. Nobody should ever be able to get away with calling us selfish. We're the most generous nation in the world. Anytime there's a problem in the world, who's the first ones to show up? The United States. Sometimes who's the only ones to show up? The United States. That's just such a lie. I saw this guy in October. He was standing about there. I was here at a conference, and he told us that our security concerns about Syrian refugees were stupid. People worried about the refugees going into Europe were not a danger. Concerns were stupid. This was like a couple of weeks before Paris. He was the former Prime Minister of Portugal, and he described himself as an ardent advocate for refugee resettlement. Well, guess how many Syrian refugees his country has agreed to take? 23. That was October 15th. They came out with that. 23. They must be stupid. So, we know that we know that these worries are not stupid. The FBI has almost 1,000 cases in every state in the nation. There have been 80 ISIS-related arrests in the U.S. and 28 convictions so far. We've lost 9,500 terrorist suspects since 9/11. I can go on. Here's something I put together with a timeline of terror plots. The ones in black are the ones that were stopped. The ones in red are the ones that weren't. The last one, 2/12, that was that machete attack in Columbus, Ohio. Remember that? Where a Muslim man went into a Jewish restaurant and began hacking people. Here's where ISIS suspects have been charged. Oh, look at that. ISIS words are stupid, you guys. There's only a few in North Carolina. You're like right in the middle. The whole thing is a massive wall of misinformation. We are being sold on the notion of refugee resettlement with pictures of people streaming across the borders in Europe, and that heartrending story of the little boy who drowned in the Mediterranean. Well, first of all, his father lived safely in Turkey. He had been there for a couple of years. They had an apartment. His father was working. His mother was working. They were fine. That they decided to jump on board and go to Europe because they thought they could get a better deal. They were not refugees. They were economic migrants, and unfortunately, in his case, they paid with their lives. That's a terrible thing, but it shows you just how much misinformation is coming out about that. Because wasn't that picture followed with an appeal to our hearts to take in refugees? Most of the people going to Europe are not refugees. Most of them aren't even from Syria. They're from all over North Africa, the Middle East, even as far as Afghanistan. And they are economic migrants, either seeking work or seeking, in many cases, welfare benefits, and I think in many cases seeking much more evil things, as we're already seeing. There's 4 million Syrians in refugee camps in Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey. Now, none of them are going to Europe. And we aren't resettling any of the ones going to Europe either. So when they show you these massive waves of people going to Europe and saying, shouldn't we do something to help them? We're not, and we're not going to. They're going to Europe. The people that are going to come here are safely ensconced in refugee camps in these 3 border countries of Syria. None of the Gulf states will take anybody, even though they are more than well equipped to do so. They've been there for years. It takes between 1.5 years, 2 years at minimum to process an application. They need money. They do need money. The UN High Commissioner says they need about $3 billion to meet all the needs. We could do that by spending the same amount, approximately the same amount of money we spend in 1 year on refugee resettlement. And for every person that comes here, we can help 12 in place. But the biggest bit of misinformation, well, not the biggest, that's not, we haven't got to that yet. The resettlement program's top priority is to return people to their home country. It is not to resettle them elsewhere. We're being sold a bill of goods. We're being told that we have to resettle these people. No, we don't. They're much better off staying where they are. Most of them will tell you that's where they want to stay because they want to go back home. They want to go back to where they grew up. They want to go where they have a familiar culture, familiar language, familiar surroundings. They don't want to come to an unknown place. And returning them is the top priority of resettlement for the people who are honest about what the resettlement program is supposed to be for. Resettlement to other countries is supposed to be the last resort for people that literally are fleeing for their lives and have no other choice. Most Syrians are not refugees by the definition we use. Our definition is based on the 1951 Convention relating to the status of refugees with amendments for later years. Here's what it says. It's a fear of persecution based on race, religion, blah, 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 blah. Individuals who have crossed an international border fleeing generalized violence are not considered refugees. All of the, or almost all of the refugees in the Syrian refugee camps are Sunni Muslims. Now, admittedly, the leadership of Syria is Shia Muslims, but that has never been an issue up until now when the Sunni Muslims decided that they were going to try to overthrow Bashar Assad. And unfortunately, I have to admit, with our help. If we hadn't come in there and tried to do that, none of this would happen. It's largely our fault. But that doesn't change the facts. They are not refugees. They are people fleeing generalized violence. They are not the people being beheaded by ISIS. The people being beheaded by ISIS are Christians and other minorities, the infidels, right? Guess what? They're not in the Syrian refugee camps because they're afraid to go there. Last year, we resettled 2,071 Syrians, fiscal year 2015. We resettled 30 Christians, 1.4%, 13 other. Almost 98% were Muslims. The Christians, in this case, are the ones with the legitimate fear of persecution. They're being slaughtered en masse, and we are not resettling them. So, what are we doing? And this is the biggest bit of misinformation. The UN High Commissioner suggested that the West resettle 130,000 Syrian refugees, or quote-unquote refugees. He wanted us to take 65,000. President Obama committed us to 10,000 in 2016 and wants another 30,000 in 2017. That's 40,000, not quite 65,000. Now, the voluntary agencies, the VOLAGs, they want us to resettle 100,000. But guess what? We already have. Since 2012, over 102,000 Syrians have already come to the United States. They just didn't come under the refugee resettlement program, so the voluntary agencies that get paid by the head did not get to make their money off these resettlers. So, they still want another 100,000. We've already gotten 100,000. And they're not refugees. Furthermore, there are other programs like asylum, temporary protected status, parole, visa waiver program. There's so many other programs. Some of them came in through those programs. The refugee resettlement program has grown out of control. We now have refugees, that's the refugee line, special immigrant visas. Now these are people from Iraq and Afghanistan who helped us in the war. I think these are legitimate refugees. They legitimately fear for their lives because they helped us. And now they're in enemy territory with no recourse. So that's legitimate, I think. Cuban and Haitian, that's gone wildly out of control. We have asylum seekers. We also have something called follow join, which is their families. That's another 15,000 that's not mentioned here. Victims of trafficking. And the unaccompanied alien children, or minors, who in fact aren't unaccompanied. They had an equal number of adults with them when they crossed the border in huge numbers last year and the year before. So much misinformation. We are looking at huge numbers. And this is just the resettlement program. Annually, at present, we are making 1 million legal permanent residents a year from people who come in under various immigration programs. 1 million a year. That's legal. And we don't know how many illegals there are. My belief is it's between 500,000 and 1 million. The visa waiver program. This is incredible. We're getting 20 million people a year coming in under the visa waiver program. That is a program where if you have a passport from any of the, I think it's 38 countries with which we have an agreement, you can come to the United States without needing a visa. And we had 20 million last year, in 2014. 153,000 overstays. 29% of total short-term visitors overstayed. No vetting, none. ISIS has a passport printing facility where they have, we've caught them. We've caught them with hundreds of blank passports. 2 of the Paris attackers had Syrian passports. This is a way to get in without any kind of vetting. And the FBI has said they can't vet the Syrian refugees, but that's just a part of the problem. We have the visa waiver program, we have temporary protected status, we have asylum. All of those have much lower bars for vetting. So, now we'll get into some of the costs. We have refugee interviews from the Department of Homeland Security. 40 is a plug number that I made up because I couldn't find the fiscal year 17 number, but it'll be in that range. State Department, processing, and then the Health and Human Services Office of Refugee Resettlement has gone from 1.5 billion to 2.2 billion in 3 years. And that number is that high because it includes the unaccompanied alien children who they are now trying to reclassify as refugees. They're not refugees. It's an illegal act, but that's what they're doing. The voluntary agencies, the VOLAGs, make huge amounts of money resettling refugees. This is the 2014 level of government grants they got according to USA government spending. It's a lot of money. Additionally, the two largest resettlers of unaccompanied alien children, $291 million for Baptist Child and Family Services. Is there any wonder why so many of these so-called church resettlement agencies want to get in on the act? Flagging parishes, bring in some refugees, shore up your money with government grants. They get over $5,000 a head. They'll tell you it's less, but it's not. And here's the thing. The Government Accountability Office had a report on refugee resettlement, they quote one of the POLAGs. One state refugee coordinator noted that affiliates have an incentive to maintain or increase the number of refugees they resettle each year. That was from the horse's mouth. Now, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary for Population, Refugees, and Migration, David Robinson, earlier did a report on refugee resettlement. With the Kosovar Albanians, everybody wanted them to stay in the refugee camps in Macedonia. This was in 1999. The UN High Commissioner wanted them to stay. The State Department wanted them to stay. The refugees wanted to stay. Even the Macedonian government preferred to have them there and send them back home when it was time. But the Committee on Migration and Refugee Affairs, now known as the Refugee Council USA, which is the lobbying organization for the POLAGs, prevailed on President Clinton. He didn't have his library at that time, but I'm sure he made some kind of accommodation. And guess what? Against everybody's will, 20,000 Kosovar Albanians were resettled to the United States. Now, the guy who wrote about this later became the deputy, he became an acting assistant secretary under this program. I think he might have changed his tune a little bit then. But he was working under Obama, so he probably didn't have any choice. So, this comes right out of a VOLAG front page. This is what refugees can expect. Furnished home, help with rent, health care, food, language classes, blah, 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 blah. Here are the VOLAGs in North Carolina. Oh, sorry. You know, I'll tell you, the Act has a list of them over here, so you can pick up that list from their table and get a whole bunch more of interesting stuff from them over there too. And buy my book. Yeah, so those are the VOLAGs in North Carolina. Here are the top 10 resettlement countries in North Carolina. Between 2003 and 2016, you got 25,429. And these are the top 10 countries. Here are the top 10 cities. Charlotte, Greensboro, Raleigh, High Point, New Bern. New Bern's a teeny little town. It's only got like 20,000 people in it. But they got, percentage-wise, more refugees than any other town. Why is that? Durham, Scarborough, no, there you have it.
Jim.
Yeah.
Can I get you?
Hey, Jay.
Picture of that slide.
Certainly. Sorry.
Thank you. That's a lot.
Yeah, I want royalties, yeah.
That's not in your book, sounds like.
Yeah, there's no C attached, so take the shots while you can. Right, you got it? Okay. Okay. I love this. Special grants. Now, we can't get this, but refugees can. And my favorite is individual development accounts. This is an account they want to teach a refugee how to save responsibly. So, if you're a refugee and you save $1, the government will match you dollar for dollar up to $2,000 for a person, $4,000 for a family.
Per year?
You know, I'm a lousy saver. I would really like to learn how to save better, but I can't. Here's something right out of the U.S. Committee of Refugees and Immigrants for North Carolina, right on the front page, asking people to develop a savings plan with their staff, receive dollar for dollar match up to $2,000 for individuals and $4,000 for family. Advertised on the front page. At USCRINC, we believe that the accumulation of assets is integral to reducing poverty and building the financial empowerment of families and individuals. I agree with that, and I would love very much to enroll in that program, but I can't. But you know, does that really teach someone responsible saving? Or does it send a message that we'll take care of you no matter what? And despite all of these advantages, there are innumerable problems. I've traveled the country. I went to New England last summer, and then subsequently I went through the Lewiston, Maine public education budget. Their English as a second language budget is up 4,000% since the year 2000. Where there used to be only a couple of dozen people in their ESL classes, now 25% of their student body doesn't speak English. This year they got 300 more. There's about 5,000 people students total in the Lewiston Public Schools. They got 300 more in the ESL class this year. And a friend of mine on the Board of Education told me that when the head of that program went to talk to his teachers about it and tell them they were going to have to somehow accommodate 300 more students over the 1,250 they already had, speaking 40 different languages, he broke down crying. Manchester, New Hampshire. Mayor Gatsis, who I've come to know over time, says there's 82 different languages spoken in Central High School. Manchester has the lowest rates for the public schools throughout the state. And it's not because they don't have good teachers. It's because it's impossible for students speaking 82 different languages to do well on the evaluation tests, which are all given in English. How do you deal with 82 different languages? How do you do it? I asked him. He's been asking for years to get a break. He doesn't even say, we don't want this. He just says, give us a break so we can absorb what we've got and let us catch our breath. And they just say no. No. They get the same 200 every year, and I talked to him about a month ago. I said, so what happened this year? Yeah, 200 again. They just don't listen. They don't care because they feel that they are entitled. They feel that we have no recourse, and it's very lucrative. It's really an outrage. Lynn, Massachusetts, I talked to the mayor of Lynn, Massachusetts. He speaks 60 different languages in public school. They got a lot of the unaccompanied alien children, many of whom come from Guatemalan, Highland, remote villages that speak a dialect that nobody's ever heard. There's nobody to interpret it. 911 calls in 36 different languages. How do you handle these things? These things are happening all over the country, and we're not being told about them. Now, here's my favorite. Refugees help the economy. Okay? This is my favorite one. And like all the rest, it's overrated at best. The problem with our country, our welfare benefits are so generous that really a lot of people don't have to work. Cato did a study and found that for each state there was an equilibrium level of wages and benefits that you'd have to surpass if you were going to encourage higher employment. So in North Carolina, that's $13.53 an hour, about $28,000 a year. Somebody earning all the benefits he's entitled to, somebody's unemployed or whatever, can get as much as $28,000 a year. Well, so the deal is we bring in refugees who are more than happy to work at minimum wage, or actually the average wage for refugees in 2014 was $9.86. But I'm using minimum wage, this is for the example's sake. So that's only $15,000 a year. But guess what? For a family of four, so the dad goes to work or the mother goes to work, whatever, at $7.25 an hour and gets $15,000 a year, guess what? They're eligible for a bunch of welfare. And when you add it all up, they get over $30,000 a year. So what are we doing? Are we really benefiting the economy? All we're doing is cost shifting more burdens onto the taxpayers. It's crony capitalism. So there are Republican conservatives that are very much down with this. A lot of towns, especially company towns, that have one big factory. They have a hard time getting Americans to come and work. They bring in 1,000 people from somewhere overseas, Somalia or whatever, and all is good. They're not paying. We are. We are. And sooner or later, the refugee is going to figure out that same deal. You know, why work for less? So in Colorado, in a town in Colorado recently, a conservative Republican congressman was enthusing to me about how valuable this program was in saving the manufacturing facility in his town. Well, about a month later, all the Somalis walked out because they couldn't pray when they wanted to. And so they've since apparently figured out some kind of workable arrangement. But this is not the kind of employee I want to have that gets to call all the shots, to tell me when he'll work and when he won't work. It's insane. And this is the kind of attitude we've got because we have encouraged it. These people are just taking advantage of the messages that we give them. If you sit there and complain, you'll get what you want. So they're asking to get their halal food for free. They're picketing in a public welfare office. But despite this much vaunted advantage of bringing in refugees to do the jobs that Americans won't, most refugees do not perform as well as Americans. And this chart, I think, is pretty dramatic. It only deals with Minnesota, but I don't think it's unique. Ethiopian, Hmong, Liberian, Mexican, Somali, all foreign combined, all above average in terms of numbers below the poverty level. And here's a better one. Refugee versus U.S. households, percentages on welfare. Here's the Muslim refugees on cash assistance, Medicaid, food stamps, 2015. All refugees in the United States. Now, over time, those numbers go down, but they never go down there. We are always paying for these refugees. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about illegal immigration. Just a few slides. Because you folks have some particularly poignant experience with that, don't you? Kate Steinle is like the poster child against illegal immigration. But she's one person. This is a table I put together from unpublished numbers that I got from the General Accounting Office. The number of illegal aliens serving time in state and federal prison for homicide in 2008 was 7,000. That's 10% of the total population of inmates serving time for homicide. It's a huge number. And if the census numbers are correct, they're representing only 5.6% of our population. Frankly, I believe that's an underestimate, though. But even if they represent 10% of our population, and thus this would only be a representative sample, not an exaggerated sample, these are 7,000 people that shouldn't be dead. And there's more, because that only goes to 2008. Yes?
Do you say illegal aliens?
Illegal aliens.
Do you have it for immigrants, the immigrant population?
I do not. I focused on illegal aliens here. Because specifically, immigrants come here legally. Illegal aliens, there's not one who should be here. We have chosen to allow them here. We have chosen that number. We have chosen to allow people to be murdered and killed by drunk illegals. We have chosen that by our unwillingness to close our borders, by our unwillingness to enforce our laws. That's outrageous. How about this? This guy murdered 3 young children with a machete. He was resettled by the Interfaith Refugee Ministry. 92% taxpayer funded. They regret the crime, but they're not going to reduce resettlement just because one guy went off the bat and murdered 3 children. November 23rd through March 2015, 1,170 illegals were arrested and charged with almost 6,000 sex crimes against children in North Carolina alone. So, when the governor signs that bill outlawing sanctuary cities, that's something that everybody should applaud. I mean, what does it take? How many people have to die? How many children have to have their lives ruined by a sexual predator before our public officials will say, okay, we'll do something about it? And thankfully, you have a governor and a legislature that finally is doing something about it. One of the few. We should get, that's right. That's right. Give him credit. Illegal aliens commit crimes wildly out of proportion to their numbers. This is from the General Accounting Office again. 25,000 murders. Between 26 and 2013, over 100 North Carolinians, specifically, have been killed by illegals. That's 100 Kate Steinleys, folks. It's 100 parents who will never come home to their kids. 100 sons or daughters who their parents will never see again. It's criminal. I listened at that same event where the High Commissioner spoke. Marioletta in copy from one of these illegal alien advocacy organizations, I can't remember the name of it, gave a story, this heartbreaking story about this illegal alien who wasn't sure if he was going to be able to be with his daughter for Christmas because he was illegal and he had to avoid the law and he might be arrested. What does she say about the 7,000 family members who will never come home ever? What does she say about these 100 North Carolinian citizens whose families will never see them again? That's completely unnecessary. That's a choice people have made. Unscrupulous, self-serving, arrogant people who have no right to be inflicting that on us. The sanctuary city movement, because it encourages lawlessness, also becomes fertile ground for Muslim terrorists to hide, as does the refugee resettlement program. Look, I'd be the first one to tell you, 95% of the Muslims that come to this country are people that just want a better life. 95% of them would rather be left alone and have their families and have a peaceful, prosperous life. The trouble is that other 5%. They're not going to tell us about them. They do not tell us about them. They have already demonstrated that in Holland. They demonstrated here. They do not want to say what's going on in their communities. They're very difficult to crack. So those Muslim enclaves provide a safe haven for terrorists to swim like Mao's fishes in the population and hide and do their planning until it's time to attack. And there will be more attacks. So, we're finally waking up and saying, enough of this. We've had enough of this. We don't want any more. So, what is the left's response to that? The response is the National Program for New Americans. White House Task Force on New Americans, headed by an organization called Welcoming America, which has offices all over the country. And their goal, in the words of its founder, is to force Americans, recognize the role everyone must play in furthering the integration of recent immigrants. You hear that? You must play that, whether you want to or not. Otherwise, you're a racist, you're a xenophobe, you're Islamophobe, you're a bad person. Religious groups parrot that voice. Where did they got it? Well, guess who they got it from? They got it from Vladimir Lenin. Here's what he said. We can and must write in a language which sows among the masses hate, revulsion, and scorn toward those who disagree with us. That's Lenin. Isn't that beautiful? It wasn't Saul Alinsky who came up with that. It was Lenin. Saul Alinsky just codified it in the Rules for Radicals. And actually there was another step in between there, but I won't get into that. The Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society no longer calls itself that. They refuted themselves as highest because their CEO, who is a Jewish man, says that Hebrew is elitist and exclusionary. So now they are highest. Now, HIAS and the Jewish people who run HIAS, they are allied with the J Street folks. I don't know if you heard of them. That's a Jewish astroturf group funded by George Soros to sit sides with the Palestinians. They wrote this report, $35,000. I still can't believe it. Somebody got $35,000 to write this 30-page pamphlet called Resettlement and Risk. And guess what it advocated? It calls for the Southern Poverty Law Center to identify and smear people like me as racists, xenophobes, Islamophobes, etc., etc., etc. And some of the people I work with, including Ann Corcoran, who is named specifically in that report, have been so labeled by the Southern Poverty Law Center. You all should look up what I've written about them. Very revealing. In addition to government support, they get billions of dollars from multiple radical foundations. Soros ties, Ford, yes, Ford is a radical left foundation. Ford essentially created the illegal immigration movement, or the modern immigration agenda, shall I say. All of these. Kaplan Foundation funded HIAS for its resettlement and risk report. All this stuff is in my book, by the way. So, what are our responses? Well, I mentioned the governor. Multiple states have proposed multiple laws regarding refugee resettlement. There's not a whole lot we can do because the law is so heavily, gives so much authority to the federal government. It's very difficult. But there are things we can do, and we're doing them. Texas and Alabama have sued the feds for violating the Refugee Act. And the Thomas More Law Center is seeking a plaintiff in its Wilson Fish lawsuit, and it's probably going to get it from Tennessee because the legislature has taken that up, and hopefully that will pass, and then Tennessee will become the plaintiff in that lawsuit. And that's a valid lawsuit because the Wilson Fish Act, which turns the resettlement program over to a VOLAG if a state if a state drops out, then the VOLAG gets assigned it. And what happened in Tennessee, the governor dropped out, and so Catholic Charities took over the administration of the refugee program, and they've just gone wild in the state. And And there was a law that was passed that some of the current laws are based on that initial law that said that communities should be able to opt out when the number of refugees that the agency planned to resettle in the community could not be supported by their welfare system. And Catholic Charities got behind the scenes and influenced the legislature and changed the law so that instead of it being an absolute right of communities to do that, communities had to appeal to, guess who? The Refugee Resettlement Coordinator for the state, which was Catholic Charities. So nobody has taken advantage of it, and they wouldn't give them time of day if they did. And Catholic Charities members laughed about how they snookered the people who were supporting that law in a conference call that came afterward. Pretty disgraceful. Okay, so my book has been advertised multiple times. Please buy a copy. I don't have that many there. You can go to the Center for Security Policy website. We have a new website called Counter Jihad. And my friend Nan Corcoran writes the Refugee Resettlement Watch blog, probably the most knowledgeable authority on refugee resettlement in the country. Thank you all so much for having me.